For the first 52 minutes, the room belonged entirely to Gavin Newsom. He was sharper and undeniably funnier than anyone in the audience had anticipated, effortlessly delivering polished counterpoints that forced even the staunchest Republicans to shift uncomfortably in their seats. He had stepped onto the stage fully prepared to be underestimated, wielding that calculated preparation like a seasoned boxer, using a low guard, drawing punches, slipping them with ease, and deliberately making his opponent appear sluggish and heavy. And Donald Trump, for those initial 52 minutes, did look heavy. The formidable figure who had routinely filled massive arenas, dominated endless news cycles, and bent an entire political party to his absolute will, suddenly seemed as though he had wandered into the wrong event entirely. He appeared to be wearing the wrong suit and armed with the wrong material. Newsom was masterfully winning the room in the exact manner he always did, deploying the perfect jawline, the impeccable hair, the practiced smile, and delivering sentences that arrived precisely on time and detonated exactly where they were aimed. Then the atmosphere violently fractured when Trump delivered a line that was not a joke, not an insult, and not a trademark nickname, but a cold, hard number. It was a number so exposed, so specific, and so utterly impossible to explain away that in the brief time it takes a television audience to change the channel, the audience abruptly stopped laughing with the California governor and started laughing directly at him. Newsom never got them back. The highly anticipated CNN town hall had been aggressively billed as the definitive state of the states, a special 90-minute primetime event featuring 2 podiums, a single moderator, and a carefully curated audience of 500 voters selected from across the entire political spectrum. The room was meticulously divided: 200 Republicans, 200 Democrats, and 100 independents. Tickets had been strictly distributed through a rigorous lottery system, specifically designed to prevent partisan stacking, resulting in a live studio audience that served as a perfect miniature representation of America itself, retirees sitting beside college students, small business owners next to union workers, people who had cast ballots for Trump, people who had voted against him, and disillusioned citizens who had not voted at all. Gavin Newsom, true to form, arrived first. He was early, thoroughly briefed, and undeniably camera-ready, standing behind his designated podium with the unnerving, calculated stillness of a man who has spent countless hours practicing his posture in front of mirrors and knows exactly how his image will render on a national split screen. His impeccably tailored suit was a rich dark blue, his tie perfectly slim, and his hair exuded the kind of flawless perfection that strongly suggests either exceptional genetics or an exceptionally expensive stylist. And in Newsom's particular case, it was undoubtedly both. Donald Trump finally walked out onto the stage exactly 7 minutes after the scheduled broadcast start time. He offered no apologies and provided no explanations for his delay. Instead, he slowly crossed the stage, briefly shook the moderator's hand, and then turned to survey the audience with the unmistakable proprietary gaze of a man scrutinizing a room he had just successfully purchased in a real estate transaction. He remained utterly silent until the moderator directed the first question his way. That crucial first question centered on the economy, specifically targeting California's GDP performance versus the broader national average, a classic teed-up inquiry perfectly designed to allow both heavyweights to deploy their meticulously prepared opening salvos. Newsom eagerly took the first swing, and his execution was undeniably brilliant. He was fluid, hyper-specific, and radiated that quiet, absolute confidence characteristic of extraordinarily expensive things, delivering his statistics completely without apparent effort. He proudly declared that California stood as the 5th largest economy in the entire world, heavily emphasizing that they aggressively lead the nation in venture capital, clean energy, investment, and cutting-edge biotech patents. He confidently noted that their state GDP growth had vastly outpaced the national average in 3 of the last 4 years, deploying a perfectly timed half smile as he smoothly added that these were not his own numbers, but rather official data compiled by the president's own Bureau of Economic Analysis. It was a masterful performance, precisely calibrated for the television medium he understood better than almost anyone in modern American politics, and it instantly paid dividends. Democrats eagerly erupted in applause, independents nodded in agreement, and even a few reluctant Republicans offered grudging acknowledgement that the governor knew exactly how to command a stage. Trump's subsequent response, in stark contrast, felt alarmingly loose, dangerously unstructured, and dragged on roughly 8 seconds too long. He bluntly retorted that California's economy is only great if you happen to be a tech billionaire residing in Palo Alto, daring Newsom to try surviving as a waiter in Bakersfield. He hammered the astronomical cost of living, noting that an average house in California costs a staggering $870,000, quipping that he owns luxury apartments in Manhattan that cost less per square foot, and at least those units come with a doorman. The audience offered a laugh, but it was fundamentally the wrong kind of laugh. It was the polite chuckle you offer a man who is merely entertaining, but certainly not winning the debate. Sensing the blood in the water, Newsom immediately pressed his advantage, firmly reminding the president that he was a small business owner who had built a successful wine business completely from scratch before ever becoming governor. He smoothly declared that he intimately understood what it truly takes to sign the front of a paycheck, not merely the back. Trump scrambled for a counterpunch that ultimately failed to land, trailing off into a disjointed point about Napa Valley and wealthy elites before the moderator abruptly moved the conversation forward. The moment unequivocally passed, and Newsom had decisively won the opening round in the exact same manner he conquered most political arenas, by being significantly better prepared, sharper dressed, and slightly more adept at the theatrical game than the opponent standing across from him. The second major clash revolved around immigration, delving deeply into the deployment of the California National Guard, aggressive federal raids, and the high-profile Newsom versus Trump litigation territory, where Newsom felt supremely confident. The governor passionately declared that he didn't launch lawsuits against the president simply because he was a Democrat, but rather because he was a governor defending his state. He forcefully argued that when the federal government deploys Marines into American cities without state consent, it ceases to be law enforcement and becomes an occupation, which he vowed to resist every single time. Trump fired back, labeling California an absolute disaster, claiming that people and massive businesses were fleeing the state in droves. Newsom, perfectly maintaining his composure and never once raising his voice, smoothly reminded Trump that during his 8-year tenure, the federal administration had sued him exactly 47 times, and he had victoriously won 39 of those battles. He confidently told the former president to check the scoreboard when discussing disasters. The studio audience practically erupted. Democrats enthusiastically leapt to their feet. Independents leaned intently forward, and even skeptical Republicans exchanged the kind of knowing glances that universally acknowledge an undeniably skilled politician. Yet, throughout this entire exchange, Trump was quietly executing a strategy that absolutely no one in the room recognized, simply because they had never witnessed it deployed in a traditional debate format. His piercing eyes were completely disconnected from the moderator and entirely ignoring Newsom. Instead, they were methodically sweeping across the live audience, not with the desperate gaze of a politician seeking validation, but with the calculated precision of a veteran stand-up comedian searching the darkness for the laugh that hasn't materialized yet. He was acutely reading the silent dissenters, the people who were not clapping, the ones sitting stubbornly with tightly crossed arms, the citizens who had arrived burdened with agonizing questions that Newsom's pristine GDP numbers and litigation scorecards would never come close to answering. He located them precisely in rows 3 through 7, quietly scattered among the applauding Democrats and independents. These were the working-class Californians who were politely acknowledging Newsom's polished data, but viscerally failing to feel its impact in their daily lives. They were the residents actually living in the Gilded State Newsom was passionately describing, yet utterly unable to recognize it outside their own windows. 52 minutes steadily ticked by, and in that time, Newsom flawlessly won 4 distinct verbal exchanges, seamlessly landed 6 heavily prepared lines, effortlessly drew enthusiastic applause on 9 separate occasions, and continuously flashed the blinding smile that had successfully propelled him from the San Francisco City Hall all the way to the governor's mansion and onto the glossy covers of national magazines. By every single superficial metric that television producers utilize to keep score, Gavin Newsom was decisively winning, and Donald Trump was quietly, intentionally letting him. Then, the moderator forcefully pivoted the debate to the catastrophic issue of homelessness. Addressing the governor directly, the moderator noted that Newsom had aggressively spent more capital on the homelessness crisis than any other governor in American history, a staggering $37 billion over the course of 6 years, and pointedly asked if that massive investment had actually produced the tangible results that Californians rightfully deserve. Newsom smoothly leaned into his microphone, clearly operating on highly familiar ground. He had robotically answered this exact question in countless press conferences, high-stakes interviews, hostile editorial board meetings, and 2 major state-of-the-state addresses. His rehearsed response was phenomenally smooth, aggressively touting the $37 billion investment as a comprehensive, multi-layered approach that aggressively prioritized permanent supportive housing, expansive mental health services, and critical substance abuse treatment programs. Trump abruptly shattered the polished narrative. He repeated the number, $37 billion, but he delivered it flatly, devoid of volume or theatrical flair. It was the chilling voice of a seasoned executive coldly reading a devastating figure off a bleeding balance sheet and utterly despising what he saw. Trump calmly asked the governor if he had any idea what he could physically construct with $37 billion, immediately answering his own question by listing the sprawling hotels, towering office buildings, and world-class, beautiful golf courses he had built for a fraction of that astronomical price. He then delivered the fatal rhetorical blow, pausing not for comedic effect, but for brutal arithmetic. He pointed out that every single one of those luxury properties actually had a roof. He hammered the devastating reality that despite incinerating $37 billion, the homelessness catastrophe had not merely stagnated, it had become demonstrably worse. He painted a grim picture of reality. Significantly more people languishing on the brutal streets in 2025 than in 2019, a horrific proliferation of decaying tents, discarded needles, and tragic deaths occurring on the sidewalks of the absolute richest state in the richest country in the entire history of the world. He demanded to know how any administration could possibly spend $37 billion and effectively purchase more of the exact same problem. Trump strategically let the brutal question hang in the heavy studio air. The audience did not laugh. The audience did not clap. Instead, they executed something far more dangerous to a sitting politician. They waited. 500 people instinctively leaned forward, collectively trapped in the agonizing tension of waiting for an adequate answer, and that profound silence became its own devastating verdict. Trump swiftly provided the answer himself, accusing the governor of fundamentally failing to count or track the massive funds. He ruthlessly cited a damning report, not from his own administration, but from Newsom's very own state auditor, which officially concluded that the state utterly failed to adequately track whether the exorbitant funds were spent effectively or even where they ultimately went. Trump coldly declared that in the private sector, losing track of $37 billion wouldn't just result in bankruptcy, it would result in a lengthy prison sentence. The entire energy of the room violently shifted. It wasn't a distinct sound, but rather a visceral feeling, the palpable sensation of 500 human beings simultaneously recalculating their allegiances. A Democratic schoolteacher seated in the third row, who had been passionately clapping for Newsom all night, completely froze when Trump dropped the $37 billion statistic. She stopped clapping for the governor, refused to clap for Trump, and simply crossed her arms significantly tighter than before. That is exactly what a political room looks like when the tide fundamentally turns. It is rarely people aggressively switching sides, but rather loyalists simply stopping their support. And when 200 partisan Democrats abruptly stop clapping, 200 Republicans instantly hear the terrifying gap, and that silence becomes absolute permission to strike. Trump ruthlessly continued the mathematical assault, relentlessly stacking the numbers. He pivoted directly to the catastrophic failures of the Employment Development Department, dropping the explosive bombshell that the agency had shockingly lost $33 billion to rampant fraud during the COVID-19 pandemic. He weaponized the horrifying details, $33 billion illicitly funneled to incarcerated prisoners, massive checks mailed to criminal syndicates in foreign countries, and unemployment benefits explicitly paid out to dead people. The sheer absurdity of the state of California actively paying dead citizens to stay home from work forced a nervous, completely involuntary laugh from the crowd, the deeply uncomfortable sound of people utterly torn between genuine amusement and sheer horror. Trump mercilessly combined the catastrophic figures, $37 billion plus $33 billion, mocking the governor's arithmetic skills as the primary reason he entered politics, and arrived at a staggering total of $70 billion. He emphasized that this unimaginable sum was not merely spent, but entirely gone, noting that he had personally allocated less capital than that on comprehensive military aid to 3 entire sovereign nations. He delivered the devastating conclusion: Newsom simply could not run a single state. For the first time all evening, Newsom's hand visibly moved to grip his podium, not aggressively, but with the subtle desperation of a man touching a railing simply to confirm the floor hadn't vanished beneath him. His meticulously prepared notes lay uselessly in front of him. He had comprehensive talking points on permanent supportive housing, mental health integration, the CARE Act, and Project Home Key, but absolutely nothing on his briefing papers addressed the combined catastrophic figure of $70 billion. No opponent in a live debate had ever ruthlessly connected those two colossal failures and aggressively demanded a real-time answer. Newsom attempted a frantic pivot, respectfully arguing that governing a massive state of 40 million diverse people is fundamentally different than constructing a commercial hotel, attempting to reframe the crisis around systemic drivers like explosive housing costs, complex mental health issues, and severe substance abuse. He defensively pointed out that other major states grappled with identical problems. Trump instantly shut the escape route down, coldly firing back that those other states didn't accidentally incinerate $37 billion in the process. When Newsom desperately tried to spin the massive expenditure as a clear reflection of the immense scale and profound scope of California's deep commitment to the issue, Trump brutally decapitated the argument. He bluntly stated that spending more money than any state in human history only to watch the catastrophic problem grow exponentially worse is not a sign of commitment, but rather a glaring monument to sheer incompetence. Then he paused and dropped 2 chilling words, or worse. Newsom explicitly heard those 2 syllables. instantly recognizing that they aggressively shifted the entire narrative frame from claiming he was terrible at his job to a far more dangerous implication that he knew exactly where the stolen money went. In that precise moment, the famous gubernatorial calm, the pristine composure that had flawlessly secured 4 debate exchanges and banked 9 massive rounds of applause, instantly evaporated. It no longer resembled genuine confidence. It looked exactly like what it was, a terribly fragile surface. Trump, possessing the predatory instincts of a man who can literally smell a room turning against his opponent, aggressively pressed his enormous advantage. He didn't do it with cruel, heavy-handed malice, but rather with the highly entertained, effortless execution of a showman who inherently knows the audience, has irrevocably decided the verdict, and he is merely delivering the spectacular execution they paid to witness. He dramatically announced his absolute favorite topic of the evening, the French Laundry. Surveying the 500 captive voters, he mockingly asked if anyone in the room had ever dined at the notoriously exclusive restaurant. Not a single hand breached the air. Trump gleefully provided the reason: dinner costs an astronomical $1,200 per person. He flexed that even as a man who owns a vast empire of tremendously beautiful, world-class restaurants, he had never possessed the audacity to charge $1,200 for a single meal, deeming the price fundamentally absurd. The audience roared with laughter, and Trump knew he absolutely owned them. This wasn't the polite, measured chuckle of the first 52 minutes. This was the raw, unbridled laughter of a massive room that had definitively picked its champion and was thoroughly enjoying the chaotic ride. He ruthlessly weaponized the hypocrisy, painting a devastating portrait of a tyrannical governor who aggressively ordered 40 million citizens that they legally couldn't eat at an Applebee's, couldn't sit in an Olive Garden, or occupy a Denny's booth for a Grand Slam breakfast, while he simultaneously sneaked off to a $1,200 unmasked indoor dinner with a dozen high-powered lobbyists. Trump hammered the agonizing contrast. The governor gorged on caviar, while terrified grandmothers were legally barred from attending church. Children were permanently locked out of their classrooms, and thousands of small businesses were systemically bled to death, one agonizing closure after another. And when finally caught in the act, Trump noted, Newsom offered the pathetic defense of a bad mistake. Trump vehemently rejected the apology, declaring that a bad mistake is severely burning the morning toast or accidentally putting diesel fuel into a regular engine. It is absolutely not deliberately locking down an entire state economy while covertly dining with elite lobbyists. As a final brutal twist of the knife, Trump loudly pointed out that while every single public school student in California was miserably trapped on endless Zoom calls with a laptop and a prayer, Newsom's own children were safely attending an exclusive private school with live, in-person teachers. Newsom desperately needed to arrest the total collapse of his evening. He aggressively stepped forward, physically closing the distance to his microphone and the towering camera lens, instinctively deploying the aggressive body language of a desperate man who acutely understands that when you are rapidly bleeding out in a room, physical proximity is the singular weapon left that doesn't explicitly require the audience's permission. He launched a furious, deeply personal counterattack, loudly declaring it truly remarkable that a man actively standing on stage lecturing him about moral accountability had been impeached twice, convicted of 34 distinct felony charges, and routinely exploited the Oval Office by heavily charging foreign governments $2,000 a night to stay at his own luxury hotel. The Democrats in the room instantly rallied, delivering sharp, highly concentrated applause in desperate support of their wounded champion. Newsom fiercely leaned into his soaring cadence, aggressively stacking his rapidly fired sentences. He furiously accused Trump of unparalleled elitism, mocking him for literally gold-plating his toilets, slapping his brand name on massive buildings he didn't physically construct, and shamefully transforming the hallowed White House into a cheap merchandise catalog. Newsom then aggressively pivoted back to the COVID-19 pandemic, furiously reminding the crowd that Trump had dangerously promised the American people the virus would miraculously disappear, recklessly suggested injecting toxic bleach into the human body, and presided over a staggering 680,000 American deaths. He practically shouted his disbelief that a man with that horrific record was actually standing there obsessing over a dinner at the French Laundry. It was undeniably Newsom's strongest, most visceral moment of the entire night, a highly specific, deeply personal counterpunch that finally brought the frantic Democrats roaring to their feet while forcing the crucial independents to critically listen. For roughly 30 seconds, Gavin Newsom actually looked like the ruthless street fighter he desperately needed to be to physically survive the brutal evening, rather than just a polished governor. Trump completely ignored the bait. He cut and hide, waiting out 3 agonizing seconds of absolute dead air after it finished before finally speaking. He dismissively waved off the 34 felonies as a tired, recycled greatest hit that Newsom obsessively plays every time he graces a television screen. Then, with terrifying precision, Trump immediately pivoted the spotlight directly onto Newsom's own rotting backyard. He explicitly named Newsom's powerful chief of staff, Dana Williamson, brutally exposing her 23 federal indictments. He meticulously listed the sickening details of her massive corruption, the illegal purchase of a $15,000 Chanel bag using stolen campaign funds, a lavish $170,000 birthday excursion to Mexico, and the fraudulent filing of $1.7 million in completely fake business expenses on her personal taxes. He aggressively hammered home the fact that this criminal was the exact woman Newsom trusted to physically run his entire office. Trump masterfully highlighted the media hypocrisy, complaining that when his own people face legal jeopardy, the press covers it obsessively for an entire year. But when Newsom's inner circle gets indicted, the governor cowardly claims he barely knew them. Trump furiously reminded Newsom that he had personally hired her, publicly praised her, and literally quoted the governor as saying he would deeply miss her insight, tenacity, and big heart. Trump executed a massive, dismissive, shrug the deeply arrogant gesture of a man who has definitively said precisely what he came to say and is entirely comfortable with the impending fallout. He bluntly stated he had absolutely no desire to debate complex legal problems, noting his own are broadcasted on every major channel, and sharply suggested that Newsom's impending legal nightmares absolutely should be. Completely discarding the governor, Trump aggressively turned his back and directly asked the CNN moderator to immediately open the floor to real audience questions, professing his deep love for unscripted interactions with actual citizens where the truly compelling, unpredictable television inevitably happens. The moderator obliged, cautiously opening the floor, and the man who slowly rose in the highly exposed fourth row fundamentally altered the trajectory of the entire night. He was a 52-year-old man wearing a meticulously ironed, though clearly not new, button-down shirt, the distinct uniform of a proud, working-class man who had carefully put on his absolute best for a deeply intimidating occasion where he was painfully uncertain he truly belonged. His hands told a profound story entirely on their own. They were the thick-knuckled, deeply creased, calloused hands of a man who brutally worked with them for a living, hands that blatantly refused to photograph well under expensive Hollywood studio lighting, clutching a visibly worn piece of paper, he quietly introduced himself into the microphone as Frank Medina, a resident of Fresno. He proudly explained that he had successfully owned and operated a modest local restaurant named El Ranchito for 6 grueling years, employing a tight crew of 6 dedicated people. He humbly noted they only made simple breakfast burritos and tacos, emphatically clarifying that they weren't the French Laundry. A soft, incredibly warm laugh instantly rolled through the massive studio audience, the beautiful, organic laugh people instinctively give when a speaker isn't desperately trying to be funny, but achieves it anyway, simply because raw, unfiltered truth possesses its own perfect, devastating timing. The warmth vanished the second, Frank continued. He recounted how, in the devastating month of March 2020, the governor's sweeping executive orders entirely shut his thriving business down. He clarified that he wasn't standing there to bitterly argue the harsh epidemiology of the lockdowns. He explicitly acknowledged that everyone completely understood the terrifying reasons behind the initial mandates and willingly accepted the painful sacrifice. He paused heavily, not for cheap theatrical effect, but because forcing out the next horrifying chapter of the story was visibly agonizing. What Frank absolutely refused to accept, he firmly stated, was the devastating nightmare that immediately followed. He desperately applied for emergency unemployment benefits for his 6 loyal workers through the massive EDD system. Every single critical application was mercilessly denied by the state, rejected for a wrong internal code, a slightly incorrect form, or an inexplicable, faceless system error. For 4 agonizing, desperate months, Frank personally called the massive government agency every single day, explicitly stating he possessed the official phone records to legally prove it. He slowly held up the worn piece of paper, not with dramatic flair, but with the exhausted reverence of a man holding a terrifying medical bill he has read so many times. The deep physical creases have functionally become part of the agonizing text. He looked directly at Newsom and delivered the fatal strike. While he was desperately calling a completely broken system begging for survival, that exact same system was systematically hemorrhaging $33 billion to completely fabricated identities, incarcerated prisoners, and aggressive criminal syndicates operating out of Russia and Nigeria. He powerfully humanized the massive data failure, recounting the tragic story of his dedicated dishwasher, Luis, who lived in a tiny studio apartment off Belmont Avenue, ruthlessly worked 60 brutal hours every single week, and had never missed a single scheduled shift in 5 long years. For 4 devastating months, the great state of California ensured Luis didn't see a single solitary dollar. Driven to absolute desperation to make the exorbitant rent on his shuttered restaurant, Frank was forced to sell his prized 2004 F-150 truck, a reliable workhorse with 241,000 hard miles on the odometer. He only got $4,000 for the vehicle, the single most valuable asset he legally owned, the truck he faithfully drove to work every single morning at 4:30 a.m. Because of the state's catastrophic failure, Frank now heavily relies on the city bus, enduring a brutal 40-minute daily commute on Route 26. He stared directly through Governor Newsom, his eyes totally devoid of hot anger, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous to a politician, the quiet, deeply exhausted clarity of a broken citizen who has completely transcended fury and arrived at the terrifying realization that the immensely powerful man standing right in front of him doesn't actually know he exists. Frank fiercely told the governor he wasn't asking about massive GDP statistics, cutting-edge venture capital, or California's boastful ranking as the 5th largest economy in the entire world. He was asking about his stolen truck, his starving dishwasher, and the 6 innocent people who completely trusted him to ensure their survival. He forcefully leveled the ultimate question: where is my money and where is yours? The flawless, prime-time veneer of California Governor Gavin Newsom completely shattered during a high-stakes CNN town hall when a single devastating mathematical calculation violently shifted the room against him. For 52 minutes, Newsom dominated the stage with practiced charisma and gleaming GDP statistics, easily deflecting early blows until Donald Trump weaponized a cold, undeniable reality. $70 billion taxpayer dollars entirely vanished under the governor's watch, divided between a failing $37 billion homelessness apparatus and a catastrophic $33 billion pandemic unemployment fraud scandal that paid out overseas syndicates and incarcerated prisoners while leaving honest citizens stranded. The macroeconomic debate instantly collapsed into an unscripted nightmare when Frank Medina, a working-class restaurant owner from Fresno standing in the fourth row, hijacked the national broadcast, clutching a worn piece of paper. He revealed how the state's systemic negligence forced him to sell his prized delivery truck just to feed his staff, while his loyal dishwasher didn't see a single dollar for months. Newsom's trademark composure evaporated into a hollow, robotic silence when pressed with a direct question he couldn't spin, allowing Trump to seize total control of the room by bypassing elite policy talking points to deliver a calculated three-word psychological strike to the voter: I hear you. This singular sequence sparked a viral wildfire across social media, plunged the Democratic camp into an absolute panic as internal data showed an explosive 71% of independents favoring Trump's connection, and prompted panic calls from ultra-wealthy mega donors demanding an immediate explanation for the missing billions before any future presidential aspirations could proceed. As dawn broke the following morning, Frank was already back at his grueling kitchen grill, flipping tortillas in the quiet shadow of a broken system, totally unaware that high above on Air Force One, Trump was actively tracking the historic television ratings and plotting his next calculated move into the heart of California. But as the smoke clears from this unprecedented media execution, the true institutional rot has only begun to unravel, exposing a web of indicted staff members, covert lobbyist dinners, and deep financial cover-ups that threaten to permanently dismantle the highest echelons of the political establishment, leaving millions of stunned Americans bracing for the explosive, impending fallout that will inevitably decide who pays the final, devastating tab when the ultimate day of reckoning arrives.